I was alerted by something other than the email. The seats were the cause, or more precisely, their absence. During my 6 years with Veriton Data Systems, I participated in every other quarterly review that took place in the same conference room, complete with 10 chairs, 2 pitchers of water, and an overpowering air vent that forced the marketing man to wear a sweater even in July. However, the chairs were gone when I got there 10 minutes early this time. At the end of the long glass table was just one. No placards with names. Not a single folder. There was just one seat, and it seemed to be waiting for someone who was unaware of what they were getting into. I was that someone. Holding my laptop and the yellow legal pad I always brought to these sessions, I stood there for a moment. I used to get teased for that. Said that I was the one person remaining who didn't simply enter everything into Notion, but all of my notes from years ago in my own shorthand were on that pad. Peculiarities of clients. A hint of renewal. I didn't forget deadlines, but others did. I had come to trust it more than Slack threads, because it had supported me during difficult times and with challenging supervisors. Behind me, the door opened. Zoe, you're ahead of schedule. Hunter Langston was that person. Strategic Growth Vice President. 33, 5 levels above me, and 2 years younger than me. Columbia MBA, whitened teeth, and a pricey haircut. He moved as though he owed something to the floor. He simply went by me, put his phone on the table, and sat in the one chair as if it had always been there for him, without waiting for a hello. I remained upright. Where are the others? I inquired. Hunter looked at his Apple Watch as if it had the solution. This is a more targeted discussion. Not a folder, no plans, just a watch that's worth more than my car and a smile. I said nothing. When someone is attempting to get you to react, I've discovered that's the best course of action. We're doing some recalibration, he finally stated, reorientation of strengths, making an effort to simplify some of the legacy procedures. Legacy. That word was familiar to me. They now sack people in this manner. Not for a reason, not for show, not for the aesthetics, but simply for having survived long enough to recall the times when judgments were taken for the work. I understand, I answered quietly. He put his forearms on the table and leaned forward a little, as if we were chatting amicably. You've spent a lot of time with Veriton. 10 years. 11. Exactly. Loyalty is that. We appreciate that. It sounded like a setup the way he stated it. We simply believe it's time to introduce some fresh ideas and vitality. Zoe, we're changing into a new kind of business. More supple. More prioritizing digital. More contemporary. I remained silent. I just wrote pre-cleared speech in my legal pad. Hunter took a quick look at my notes. He said, his tone lightening, as if I should give him thanks. You're not being let go. Under one of our new portfolio leads, we're moving you into a support role, an advisory function that is somewhat hybrid. More back-end strategy and fewer hours spent interacting with clients. At that moment, it became clear. They were interrupting me, slowly, silently, putting me out of sight and off the main floor while someone else claimed the job I had constructed, and I was aware of who that individual was. Caldwell Mira. I assisted in writing one successful proposal, which led to her promotion last month while she was ill with stomach poisoning. The worst part? She was a protégé of Hunter. This was not a downgrade. Erasure was the term. I repeated, I see. And this time, I could feel it sinking into my chest. He got up, buttoned his jacket, and grinned, as though we had just made a purchase. He remarked, I'm happy you're playing well with others. After watching him go, I sat by myself in the glass box, in the one chair that was left for me with my yellow legal pad open on the table. I was not picked up by anyone. Nobody informed me of the next steps. I simply sat there and listened to the sounds of the people I used to be, a part of a faint murmur coming through the walls. Additionally, I wrote something else on my notebook, and double underlined it, "They haven't noticed it yet. We didn't even have a marketing department when I started working at Veriton." Every Monday morning, we squabbled over 2 whiteboards, a single shared printer, and 17 of us. At the age of 26, I had recently left a data analyst position that barely covered my rent, and Veriton had recently secured its first mid-size logistics customer, Brightwave Transport, which was still using spreadsheets for payroll and fleet tracking. My occupation convert chaos into something rational. No genuine training, no championship. All I needed was a laptop, some SQL programs I built myself, and a knack for seeing details that others would have overlooked. My advantage was that I moved deeply, but not quickly. I discovered how the CFO of Brightwave thought what time zone she worked in when she responded to emails the quickest, and how her internal team re-timestamped records to hide reporting delays. I never confronted them about it. We still fulfilled all of our deadlines, so I simply changed our deliverables so that nobody had to look foolish. They extended our contract for an additional 3 years after the conclusion of that one. "That wasn't data science," my then boss Arjun exclaimed, dragging me aside. "It was a diplomatic move. Every year after that, I kept that in mind." Veriton expanded quickly. There are new floors, new faces, and new terminology such as synergy, brand presence, and velocity. I also adjusted, silently. They brought me in when a deal was on the line, but I never pushed for titles or tried to outshine anyone. They called me first when a system malfunctioned. However, everything changed when Hunter joined last year. He was hired from a Boston consulting firm with the ambiguous directive to scale strategic operations. No one understood what that meant, but all of a sudden, our job names began to change. Our organizational charts became more attractive, and we had regular meetings that never accomplished anything. Without a doubt, Hunter was smooth. He was able to convey just enough to come across as in control without being overly specific. The type of guy who adds bullet points to your emails as if he had written them himself and forwarded them to other people. I initially disregarded it. He wasn't the first to claim credit for something. It wouldn't be him alone. Then Mira appeared, though. I didn't detest her. She was youthful, high energy, and always on. I saw aspects of myself in her having something to prove. However, Hunter quickly took her under his wing, pushed her into rooms before she had a chance to become familiar with the layout, and she gave him permission. Perhaps she believed he was providing opportunities. Perhaps she was unaware that he was using her as a shield to stroll through them first. I noticed little changes in my projects. My calendar shrank. Appointments vanished in silence, and strategy memos were transmitted, with my name deleted from the contributor list, as clients I had worked with for years began to be shifted for capacity balancing. Still, I remained silent. My yellow legal pads were all I kept, labeled with the names of the clients and page after page of notes who said what, when, and how won for each quarter. Fixes were done. Deadlines were met, and Hunter dismissed problems as non-issues until they became more serious and somehow became the fault of someone else. It became evident by the end of Q2. They weren't merely ignoring me. They were establishing a new story. That I had fallen behind was outdated and was no longer aligned with the growth culture. When someone inquired why I hadn't been included in the Apex project assessment during a Friday stand-up, I heard Mira say that exact thing. She said that through the glass as I stood outside the conference room door. I don't mean to offend Zoe, but she simply doesn't agree with the current course. Our current goal is to become a growth culture, as if I were a hindrance. I went home that weekend, took all of the legal pads out of my storage drawer, and spread them out on my apartment floor. Notes for 3 years, client names, measurements, and pitches for renewal. I discovered bugs before deployment. I jotted down some ideas in a margin, and 3 weeks later, they appeared in Mira's decks. I remained calm. I've only recently begun to organize. A spreadsheet was created using one pad. A deck was created from the spreadsheet. The deck became a map of what I had constructed and touched, and what they were now claiming as their own. It wasn't retaliation, for clarity's sake, since I had knowledge that they did not. They had forgotten who still understood the true workings of everything in their haste to be seen. Furthermore, I didn't want to remain incognito indefinitely. If you're paying attention, you'll always notice when those who are trying to push you away go too far. 2 weeks after they realigned my role, that was the moment for me. I was now working from a quiet corner desk, with no window or client calls, just support coordination. In reality, this meant that I double-checked back-end logs that Mira's team hardly understood, and babysat task tickets that no one else wanted. It was all right. I knew my value without a title. I wanted something to crack. A slide. Something that confirmed the veracity of what I had already been recording. It happened at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday sharp. A junior salesperson I hardly knew sent me a Slack ping. I apologize for bothering you, Zoe, but could you tell me where the most recent Riverbridge compliance specification is located? I blinked. I no longer had Riverbridge as a client. 6 weeks prior, it had been given to Mira for visibility, as Hunter put it. Nevertheless, I answered. In early July, I forwarded it to Mira's group. Wasn't the shared folder where it was uploaded. In response, the junior said, "You never delivered it," she replied. "Since we don't have anything on file and they are inquiring about Clause 7, I'm just being sure." That felt like a heavy weight in my chest. Clause 7 was a serious matter. It discussed the need for data sovereignty in relation to EU privacy regulations. The entire renewal process can slow or worse fail if Riverbridge doesn't receive a response quickly. My response was straightforward. Allocate 20 minutes to me. I took the email out of my personal archive. Yes, I had one. Dated July 7th. Riverbridge compliance package is the subject line. Forwarded to Mira and her colleague Ethan. I had evidence. I also have the actual document. Thoroughly examined, time-stamped, legally signed. It even contained my comments on Clause 7 and the requirement for a special appendix that I had created for Riverbridge's policy. I copied the law and forwarded the email to the junior. I didn't stop there, though. I opened the new system folder that sales was now using, which Mira's team had set up. Empty. Not a file. No notes. No handoff. I realized then how dangerous what they were doing was. Politics was no longer the only issue. There was danger. They had taken control of my accounts without knowing what they were. Despite taking down the scaffolding, they continued to ascend. And now it was beginning to sway. I stayed late that night after everyone had gone. I reviewed the 3 main accounts that I used to oversee Helios Freight Equinox Labs and Riverbridge. The issue was the same for all 3. Files that are missing. Outdated specifications. JIRA follow-up tasks that are listed as done but lack accompanying effort. It wasn't carelessness. It was a theater. The foundation was collapsing beneath Hunter and Mira's successful performance. Everything was printed by me. Every timestamp was logged. I made copies of all of my notes, including the ones written in old yellow pads in shorthand. After that, I decided. I made contact with someone outside the workplace. Before leaving Veriton to join a consulting firm last year, Lauren, who went by Lauren, was employed in customer relations. Although it had been months since we last spoke, I recalled her saying, "Call me if things ever get weird." My ears are still on that floor. So I did. We met in a coffee shop close to the West Side Pier, a long way from the workplace. Neutral territory. She listened while I presented everything to her plainly, gently, and simply. She gave me a single nod when I finished saying, "That clarifies a lot. Rumor has it that Riverbridge may walk. Sales is being blamed by Mira." I gave a head shake. They are not at fault. They lost their sight. Lauren leaned closer. Want this to be revealed or fixed? For a long moment, I watched the wind pushing light across the water as I peered out the window. Both, I replied. But in the proper sequence. She grinned. Then I believe I can assist. It turned out that Riverbridge had recently contacted Lauren's firm for backup consultation. Veriton was also unaware. Still, I gave her a simple flash drive with the quiet folder named Continuity ZL on it. Everything Riverbridge required was contained there. Contracts, notes, contacts, and papers. Evidence indicating the task was completed. Evidence of its disregard. She wasn't asked to use it by me. Don't guess if they ask you why Veriton is slipping. I simply said, simply present the facts to them. They're going to wish they listened, she remarked, nodding and shutting the drive in her bag. I didn't grin. Not quite yet, since this was not retaliation. This was responsibility. The kind that erodes instead of blowing up, one omission at a time exposed. And beneath their flawless little brand deck, I could sense the tide shifting, albeit just a little. Riverbridge discontinued their Q3 sync with Veriton 2 days after I gave Lauren that drive. Not rescheduled, not delayed, simply canceled. Internal commotion began instantly, first as a Slack whisper and then as an invitation to an urgent meeting with the subject line, Riverbridge escalation urgent. I was not invited. It wasn't necessary. Lauren had texted me by that point. They observed the documents, the dates too. They're not content, in particular on the absent legal appendix. She mentioned that Hunter's name was used during the chat. Mira's did as well. My name was not mentioned by her. I knew it was working because of that. I entered the office the following morning to an odd silence. Not the quiet sort. Just before a wire pops, it hums like electricity. She didn't have Mira at her desk. Hunter wasn't either. There was an IT representative in the corridor of the executive suite discussing credential resets. By midday, the CEO's executive assistant had invited me to a meeting. Not from Hunter. Not from Mira. From a person 3 levels higher than them. Just Zoe was written in the subject line. Today. I made no inquiries. Simply arrived. I was surprised by how little the room was. No windows, 3 chairs, and a table. The CEO was sitting already. She didn't appear irate. Simply exhausted. As if she had finally received the report card that her team had been keeping hidden for the entire semester. She motioned me to take a seat. She stated, I looked over the Riverbridge chain. Everything. I waited. You had the records, the agreements, the updates on compliance. Everything was delivered on schedule. Yes, I said. And Mira's group never filed any of it. I gave a nod. They claimed to have done so. She folded her hands and leaned back. What prevented you from elevating this earlier? I didn't think twice. Because I knew nobody was paying attention. I thus began to keep records. There was a long pause. Then she continued, This week I would like you to talk to our client strategy lead. Aid us in stabilizing what remains. I arched an eyebrow. What function? She paused. Do it correctly, regardless of the title you need. The shift was that. Power slanted at that instant. I refrained from boasting. I didn't grin. I only gave one nod. All right, I replied. However, I refused to report to Hunter. Additionally, I will never again work under Mira's procedure. You won't, she muttered. They are no longer in their respective roles. That was it. As simple as that. Gone were the 2 individuals who had reduced my value to a footnote. Perhaps not fired, but moved out of the way in silence. Redirected to special projects, denied access, or placed on extended leave, depending on who you asked. I didn't inquire. I opened a fresh yellow legal pad and returned to my workstation, which was still in the corner and without a window. Line 1. We'll write it ourselves this time. The story began to change throughout the course of the following few days. Team leads began looping me back into client channels, and people who hadn't looked at me in weeks suddenly demanded a quick sync. Sales requested background information. Finance even asked me for my thoughts on the delayed revenue gaps, which Mira had clarified with a chart and no figures. Power didn't feel like it. It was like gravity coming back. The lies couldn't hold. So it seemed like things were falling back into place, not because I made them. I was in tune with Riverbridge by Friday, alongside Lauren. On their side, not Veriton's. Her company had agreed to a short-term contract to help with supervision and transfer. She grinned, but said little when I logged into the call. She didn't have to. I'm glad to see someone who understands our file system, the Riverbridge CFO stated, glancing at me from the other side of the computer. That was the end of it. No cheers, not a word. Simply the silent confirmation that I had returned to the room. Not because I was admitted, because I used the truth to earn my way back. I stayed late that night. I didn't have to, since I wanted to put things in writing. At Veriton, I turned back to the first yellow pad I had ever used. It was old with pencil smudges in the margins and dog-eared pages. A single message that I had scrawled years ago, most likely during a call when no one else was looking, was located at the rear. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not supporting them just because they can't see it. I emphasized it once again, twice. The problem with foundations is that people tend to overlook them until the floor collapses. This time, they noticed my scribbling on the concrete when they looked down. Riverbridge had officially renewed at the end of the month. Minor changes were made to the contract, primarily to the text, rather than the structure. Even if it was bruised, the trust was still there and could be rebuilt. Lauren respectfully and quietly informed me that her firm would be taking a step back. She said, "You've got it covered." And now they are aware of it. Not everything at Veriton changed at once. No parade was held. No announcement for the entire organization. Simply realignment, the authentic sort. Mira was moved to Denver to work with an off-site transformation team. Her calendar drained like a pool, yet no one mentioned being demoted. She didn't bid farewell. She probably didn't know how. Hunter remained for an additional 2 weeks, just long enough to allow the board to complete its evaluation of Q3. Then he vanished off the organizational chart with a gray circle in place of his profile picture. He had taken a leave of absence to explore new opportunities, I subsequently learned. No fireworks, nothing but quiet. When the loudest people go, they are always the quietest. It's funny, their jobs weren't taken over by me. They weren't what I wanted. I was given the title of Client Stability Director instead. Not dazzling. Not anything that appears on a keynote presentation. However, that's precisely correct. They provided me a larger office even though I didn't request one. Natural light and glass walls. I only had 3 items when I moved in my yellow legal pads, a plant from the old desk that had somehow survived everything, and my laptop, all of which were neatly piled on the shelf, like a log of everything they overlooked. The one with just one chair that I brought to that first meeting. The top one is that one. When I opened it last week, I discovered a phrase I had written the day Hunter attempted to discredit me at work. They haven't noticed it yet. Now, however, they did, and everything altered as a result. I started getting serious inquiries from people I instructed years ago. Not about assignments, about listening skills, how to be aware of the quiet, how to create the kind of trust that endures after the presentation is over. The next morning, one of the junior analysts, Ren, stopped by with coffee and inquired as to whether I believed the business had finally learned its lesson. I took in her sweet eyes and disheveled hair as she did her best to live in a place where titles still have more weight than the truth. Some lessons are learned once, I added. Others need to be retaught. She gave a nod. She took out her own legal pad after that. The same hue as mine. Would you mind if I saw your upcoming review? I grinned. Please do. Lauren sent me a note that afternoon. Riverbridge would like to suggest you for a position on a regional advisory board. Separate seat. Are you in? I answered plainly, let's speak. I could say yes now because I felt I had earned the right to do so, not to gain prestige or prove anything, not only at my place of employment, but how, and who was it with a question for you, and the lesson. All of this has taught me something straightforward yet challenging. Some people won't realize how valuable you are until it's too late. On some days, being invisible will feel like a verdict, and silence like defeat. One day, though, someone will need what you can only provide if you keep your head down, your notes sharp, and your compass steady. And when does that day arrive? You won't have to yell. All you'll have to do is talk. I now ask you, what are you covertly constructing today, when no one is looking, that could ultimately rescue the day?